At my father's 60th birthday party, in the middle of a toast, my brother announced he was selling my home out from under me. He called it a gift. He did it with a smile, in front of 50 people who applauded him for his generosity, while I stood frozen in the corner, holding the cake I had spent 2 days baking for our dad. But I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I just quietly put the cake down, walked to my room, and began to save the only thing that mattered. And when my brother found me an hour later, he didn't ask if I was okay. He asked if I was trying to ruin the party. My story isn't about a house. It's about the slow, creeping realization that to my family, I wasn't a person. I was a utility. And that night, they decided to shut the power off. Our childhood home wasn't a mansion. It was a sturdy, 2-story craftsman in the damp green quiet of the Pacific Northwest, a place that always smelled faintly of rain, old books, and my father's pipe tobacco. For the last 8 years, it had been my sanctuary, my prison, and my entire world. After my mother passed, I was the one who moved back. My brother, Leo, lived 3 states away, climbing the corporate ladder in a world of glass towers and stock options. He had a wife, Claire, who looked like she was assembled from a catalogue of quiet luxury, and 2 kids who only knew their grandfather through filtered video calls. I was the one on the ground. I was a freelance graphic novelist. My studio was the converted sunroom, a space filled with drawing tablets, sheets of Bristol board, and the organized chaos of a life lived in panels and ink. It was where I was creating the silent cartographer, my life's work, a sprawling fantasy epic I'd been meticulously crafting since college. My life ran on a different clock than Leo's. It was measured in deadlines, not quarterly earnings. In brewed coffee at 3 a.m., not power lunches. And it was measured in the daily rhythms of caring for my father, Frank. His health had been a slow, gentle decline. Not a dramatic collapse, but a gradual fading. He needed help with his medications. Someone to make sure he ate properly. Someone to drive him to his weekly cardiology appointments. Simple things, but they were cumulative. They were a full-time job, layered on top of my own. Leo helped, of course. He'd send a check every few months with a note that said, "For Dad's expenses." It was never quite enough to cover everything, but it was enough for him to feel like he was contributing. It was a participation trophy for being a son. The week of my father's 60th birthday was a perfect storm of my 2 lives colliding. I was on a tight deadline for a major publisher, the kind of project that could finally get the silent cartographer a serious look. The stress was immense, a constant low-grade hum of anxiety. At the same time, I was planning the entire birthday party. Leo had called a month prior, his voice smooth and executive. "Maya, let's do something big for Dad's 60th. A real celebration. I'll handle the budget. You handle the details." The details meant everything. It meant coordinating with the caterer I found, a local woman whose food was incredible and affordable. It meant hand-addressing 50 invitations. It meant deep cleaning the house from top to bottom, pruning the overgrown rose bushes my mother had planted, and spending hours on the phone with cousins, confirming their attendance. It meant baking his favorite cake, a complicated Black Forest recipe that took 2 days to get just right. I was running on fumes, fueled by caffeine and a sense of filial duty that felt less like love and more like a deeply ingrained habit. The day before the party, I barely slept, toggling between finishing a crucial chapter of my client work and dicing the cake, my hands stained with chocolate and my eyes burning from staring at a screen. Leo and Claire were scheduled to arrive the morning of the party. Their flight was delayed, a fact I learned via clipped text from Leo. Flight pushed. See you around 2. Hope things are under control. Not, do you need help? Or, is there anything we can pick up? Just an assumption that I, the ever-reliable Maya, had it all handled. And I did. By the time their rental SUV, a gleaming white monstrosity far too clean for our gravel driveway, pulled up, the house was immaculate. Music was playing softly. Appetizers were arranged, and our father was sitting happily in his favorite armchair, wearing the new sweater I'd bought him. They swept in like visiting royalty. Leo, tall and confident in a crisp linen shirt, clapped Dad on the back. Claire, all sharp angles and expensive minimalist jewelry, gave me an air kiss that smelled of perfume I couldn't afford. The place looks charming, Maya, she said, her eyes scanning the room. So much history here. It wasn't a compliment. It was the way a developer might describe a building right before they gut it. She drifted into my studio, which I'd left open so guests could see my work. She picked up a page from my manuscript, holding it by the very edge with 2 fingers, as if it might be contaminated. This is what you do all day. It's very detailed. The word hung in the air, a synonym for time-wasting. The afternoon became a blur of me playing hostess, waitress, and nursemaid. I refilled drinks, cleared plates, and gently reminded Dad to take his afternoon pill, all while Leo held court in the living room, telling animated stories about a recent business trip to Singapore. He had a gift for it. He could make a story about a corporate merger sound like an action movie. People were captivated. I was just the background character ensuring the props were all in place. At one point, I overheard a cousin say to Leo, "It's so wonderful what you do for your father." Leo just smiled, a humble, self-effacing little tilt of his head. "We do what we can. Family is everything." I felt a bitter taste rise in my throat and swallowed it down with a cold gulp of seltzer water. It was the official beverage of my life. Bland, bubbly, and trying desperately to settle an upset stomach. The simmering resentment wasn't new, but it felt sharper that day, honed to a fine edge by exhaustion. It was in the way Claire subtly rearranged the decorative pillows I'd set out. It was in the way Leo handed me his empty glass without making eye contact, as if I were part of the catering staff. It was in the casual way he talked about his family's upcoming ski trip to Aspen, while I was mentally calculating if I could afford to fix the leak in the upstairs bathroom. There was a chasm between our lives, and he had built a bridge of condescension across it, one he strolled over whenever he felt the need to visit the old world. The breaking point didn't come with a bang. It was a slow, agonizing crescendo, disguised as a celebration. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the lawn, I started lighting the candles on the cake. 60 tiny flames flickered, a small constellation of years. That was my cue. I was about to start the happy birthday song when Leo stood up, tapping a wineglass with a spoon. The room fell silent. "If I could have everyone's attention," he began, his voice resonating with the easy confidence of a man used to being listened to. He launched into a beautiful, heartfelt speech about our father. He talked about Dad's work ethic, his quiet strength, the lessons he'd taught them as boys. He even mentioned our mother, and for a moment, my cynicism wavered. His words were perfect, polished, hitting every emotional note. People were smiling, dabbing at their eyes. My father looked on, his face glowing with pride. I stood by the kitchen doorway holding the heavy cake, feeling a strange mix of pride and invisibility. Dad, you've spent your whole life taking care of others, Leo continued, his voice thick with emotion. You worked at that plant for 40 years. You raised us. You gave us everything. And for the past few years, Maya has been incredible, holding down the fort here. He gestured vaguely in my direction, a quick flick of the wrist. A few people glanced at me and smiled politely. It felt like being thanked in the acknowledgments of a book you'd ghost-written. But it's time for you to have a real retirement, a life of ease. No more worrying about leaky roofs or mowing this huge lawn. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the anticipation build. I could feel the shift in the room, the collective lean-in. So, as my 60th birthday gift to you, I've made a decision. I've taken care of everything. He turned to face my father directly, his smile broad and radiant. I've listed the house. It goes on the market Monday. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a wave of excited murmurs. My mind went blank. The words didn't compute. Listed the house. They sounded like a foreign language. I've already found the perfect place for you, Dad. Leo barreled on, his voice triumphant. A beautiful community called Azure Vistas. It's more like a resort. Golf course, swimming pool, 24-hour medical staff on call. You won't have to lift a finger. He raised his glass high. You've earned it. So, a toast. To Dad. To his new beginning. The room erupted in applause. To Frank! People shouted. Cousins and neighbors surged forward to congratulate my father, to slap Leo on the back, telling him what a good son he was, what a generous, incredible man. My father looked stunned, overwhelmed, a deer in the headlights of his son's magnanimity. And I just stood there. The cake in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The 60 tiny flames were beginning to melt, wax dripping onto the chocolate frosting I had so carefully swirled. My ears were ringing. No one was looking at me. In a room full of people, in the house I had lived in and cared for and poured my life into, I had become completely invisible. He hadn't just sold a building of wood and nails. He had sold my studio. He had sold my sanctuary. He had sold my past and my present. And he'd done it without so much as a phone call. He had gift-wrapped my entire life and given it to someone else. My first instinct was to drop the cake, to let it smash on the hardwood floor and watch the shock and horror spread across their faces. I wanted to scream. I wanted to howl like a wounded animal and ask him, ask all of them, what they thought was going to happen to me. Where did I fit into this beautiful new beginning? Was I a piece of furniture to be sold, along with the house? But I didn't. Something inside me, a cold, hard knot of clarity, took over. My rage was so immense, so absolute, that it became perfectly still. It was the eerie calm in the eye of a hurricane. I turned around, very slowly, and walked back into the kitchen. I placed the cake carefully on the counter, the little flames still flickering. Then I blew them out, one by one. 60 years, extinguished in a single breath. I walked out of the kitchen, past the laughing, celebrating crowd. No one noticed. I was a ghost in my own home. I walked past the living room where Leo was now showing people a glossy brochure of Azure Vistas on his tablet. I walked up the stairs, my feet silent on the worn carpet runner. I went not to my bedroom, but to my studio. The room was bathed in the soft, fading light of the evening. My work was everywhere. Stacks of finished pages, concept sketches pinned to a corkboard, my digital drawing tablet glowing softly. This was my heart, laid bare. This was the part of me they had never understood and had just tried to erase. I didn't pack clothes. I didn't grab my toiletries. I went to my desk and began to unplug my hardware. The main hard drive, the backup drive, the backup of the backup. Years of work, millions of tiny digital strokes, all consolidated onto these small, dense bricks of data. I wrapped them carefully in sweaters and placed them in my portfolio case. I took the original manuscript for The Silent Cartographer, over 300 pages of ink on paper, and slid it into the case as well. It was a methodical, silent process. I was a surgeon, excising a tumor. Or maybe I was an archivist, saving the last remnants of a civilization from a fire. The civilization was me. An hour passed. The sounds of the party downstairs had muted to a dull roar. I heard footsteps on the stairs, then a sharp knock on the studio door before it swung open. It was Leo. His face was flushed with wine and victory. The smile faltered when he saw me, the portfolio case in my hand, the empty space on my desk where my computer used to be. "What's all this?" he asked, his tone laced with annoyance. "People are asking where you are. Aunt Carol wanted to thank you for the deviled eggs." I just looked at him. "I'm packing," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. He let out an exasperated sigh, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Maya, don't be so dramatic. Is this about the house I was going to tell you?" "When?" I asked. The word was flat, dead. "After the for sale sign went up in the yard? After the movers arrived? I knew you'd be emotional about it." He shot back, his voice rising. "I didn't want to ruin Dad's birthday with a big, messy scene. So you created a big public spectacle instead," I said. "One where you're the hero and I'm... what, exactly? The collateral damage?" "Oh, for God's sake, stop being a martyr," he snapped. "This is a good thing. Dad needs professional care. And you can finally get a real life. Get a little apartment in the city. Meet someone. You can't just hide away in here drawing your little cartoons forever." Little cartoons. The two words struck me with the force of a physical blow. All those years, all those 3 a.m. nights, all the sacrifices, all the passion and belief I had poured into my work, reduced to 2 dismissive, belittling words. It was in that moment that I understood. He didn't just see my life as less important than his. He saw it as a joke. A childish hobby I needed to grow out of. I zipped up the portfolio case. The sound was loud in the quiet room. "You didn't do this for Dad," I said, my voice shaking slightly, not with sadness, but with a pure, distilled rage. "You did this for you. You did this so you could write a check and outsource your conscience. So you never had to deal with the messy, inconvenient reality of him getting older. You bought yourself peace of mind." "And what's wrong with that?" he demanded. "I can afford to. You can't. This house is falling apart. Dad's medical bills are only going to go up." This is the logical solution. It's a solution you made without consulting a single person it affects, I replied, picking up the case. I walked towards the door. He stood in the way, blocking my path. "Where are you going?" he asked, a flicker of panic in his eyes now. "You can't just leave. The party is still going on. You're going to upset Dad." "No," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "You did that. You just haven't realized it yet. Now get out of my way, Leo." He stared at me, truly seeing me for the first time all day, and he didn't see his sister. He saw a problem, an unexpected variable in his perfectly calculated equation. He hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. I walked out of my studio, down the stairs, and straight out the front door, leaving the sound of the party, the ghost of the cake, and the entire life I had known behind me. I didn't look back. This wasn't the first time Leo had bulldozed over my life in the name of what he considered logic or progress. It was just the grandest, most public demonstration of a pattern that had been set in childhood. I remember being 10 years old, spending an entire summer building an intricate diorama of a fantasy city from my imagination. It was made of cardboard, clay, and bits of moss from the backyard. It was my most prized possession. One afternoon, Leo and his friends were roughhousing in the basement where I kept it. I heard a crash. I ran downstairs to find my city flattened, a football lying in the ruins of the citadel I had spent a week sculpting. Leo's apology was immediate and insincere. "It was an accident, Maya. Geez, it's just cardboard." My father came down, took one look at the scene, and put his arm around Leo. "Son, you and your friends need to be more careful. But Maya," he said, turning to me, my face streaked with tears, "it's just a toy. Leo didn't mean it. You can build another one." I never did. What was the point of building something beautiful if the people around you saw it as disposable? The dynamic was cemented. Leo was the future, practical, ambitious, destined for success. I was the dreamer, sensitive, artistic, and, in their eyes, impractical. My passions were treated as cute, childish hobbies, while his were seen as serious ambitions. When he wanted a new computer to learn coding, my parents dipped into their savings. When I wanted a professional set of acrylic paints, I was told to use the ones you have, or wait for my birthday. The message was clear. His pursuits had value. Mine were an indulgence. The defining moment came after my mother's death. I was 29, living in a small city apartment, finally making a precarious living with my art. Leo was already married to Claire, already a vice president at his firm. My father was adrift. The grief had hollowed him out, and the quiet upkeep of the house became too much. We had a family meeting over the phone. "I just don't know what to do, kids," my father had said, his voice thin and frail. Leo spoke first, his tone efficient and decisive. "Okay, here's the plan. We can't sell the house. Not yet. Too many memories for Dad. Maya, you're freelance. Your schedule is flexible. It makes the most sense for you to move back in for a while, just to help Dad get back on his feet. I'll handle the financial side. I'll send money every month to cover the mortgage and any extra expenses. It'll be a team effort." It sounded so reasonable. A team effort. But I knew even then what that really meant. I would provide the labor, the time, the emotional energy, the actual day-to-day work. He would provide the money, the clean, detached contribution that allowed him to feel responsible without ever being present. I agreed. I packed up my small apartment, put my own life on hold, and moved back into my childhood bedroom. The first year, the money arrived like clockwork. The second year, it became less frequent. A check would be a few weeks late, accompanied by an apologetic text. "Sorry, cash flow is tight this month." By the fourth year, the payments were sporadic at best. I'd have to send him gentle reminders, which I hated doing. It made me feel like a charity case. "Hey, Leo, just a heads up, the property tax bill is due," I'd text. His reply would come days later. "On it." Sometimes the money would appear, sometimes it wouldn't. I started taking on more and more client work, working late into the night, not just for my career, but to cover the bills he was supposed to be paying. I never complained to my father. I didn't want to worry him or make him feel like a burden. And I never truly confronted Leo. I'd just absorb the cost, patch the leaks, and keep things running. I was the family's silent shock absorber. My sacrifice was assumed. My presence was a given. I had allowed myself to become a fixture in the house, as reliable and as overlooked as the plumbing. The party wasn't an isolated betrayal. It was the culmination of 1,000 small dismissals, a lifetime of being told, in ways both subtle and overt, that my life, my work, and my feelings were secondary to the grand, important narrative of my brother's success. He didn't see himself as cruel. He saw himself as a problem solver. And that night, I was just a problem he thought he could solve with a brochure and a toast. The night I left, I drove to the cheapest motel I could find on the outskirts of town. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. I sat on the edge of the stiff polyester bedspread and didn't move for an hour. My phone started buzzing relentlessly just after midnight. First, a text from Leo. "Where the hell are you? Dad is asking for you. You've really upset him." I ignored it. Then, another. "Maya, this is childish. Pick up the phone." Then, a call from my Aunt Carol. Then a cousin. They were his flying monkeys, dispatched to manage the situation, to bring the errant part back in line. I turned the phone off. The next morning, I turned it back on to a voicemail from my father. His voice was confused, laced with the hurt bewilderment of someone who only knows half the story. "Maya Bean, it's Dad. Leo said you got upset and left. I don't understand. He's just trying to help. Please call me." It was a gut punch. Leo had already spun the narrative. I wasn't the victim. I was the ungrateful, overly emotional daughter who couldn't appreciate a generous gesture. I didn't call any of them back. Instead, I called the one person I knew would understand. My friend Sarah, a fellow artist who knew my family history. I told her everything, my voice cracking for the first time. She didn't offer platitudes. She just said, "Good for you. What's your next move?" My next move. I hadn't thought that far. But as I sat in that dingy motel room, with my life's work safe in a portfolio case beside me, I knew I couldn't go back. Not to the house, and not to the role I had been playing. That afternoon, I found a small one-bedroom apartment for rent online. It was tiny, in a slightly run-down part of the city, but it had a big window with good light. I used the emergency fund I had painstakingly built from my freelance work to pay the deposit and first month's rent. 2 days later, Leo found me. I don't know how. A friend of a friend, probably. He showed up at my new apartment door, unannounced. He wasn't holding flowers or a peace offering. He was holding a stack of papers. "This has gone far enough," he said, pushing past me into the sparsely furnished living room. "You need to stop this little protest and think about Dad." "I have been thinking about Dad for 8 years, Leo," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "It's my turn to think about me." "Think about you?" He laughed, a short barking sound. "What is there to think about? I've solved all our problems. Dad gets top-tier care, the estate gets settled, and you are free. I've done you a favor. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you?" I stared at him, marveling at the sheer, unbreachable wall of his ego. "You made me homeless, Leo. You took my home and my studio. You belittled my career, and you announced it to 50 people as if it were a damn surprise party." "It's not your home!" he yelled, his composure finally cracking. "It's Mom and Dad's house. It's an asset. I am the executor of the estate, and I am making a sound financial decision to preserve Dad's capital for his long-term care." He threw the papers down on my small kitchen counter. It was the listing agreement for the house. "The agent is coming on Friday. The house needs to be empty. You need to come get your things." "My things?" I said. "You mean the furniture I bought? The kitchen supplies I paid for? The life I built inside those walls while you were out building your stock portfolio?" "Oh, don't start with the tiny violins, Maya," he sneered. "You lived there rent-free for 8 years. That was it. The final clarifying insult. The years of grocery shopping, cooking, cleaning, medication management, late-night worrying, the constant, draining, invisible labor of caregiving. All of it erased and reframed as me being a freeloader. "I'm not coming back to the house, Leo," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "And I won't be at the meeting with the agent." "What are you talking about? Your stuff is there." "It's just stuff," I said, echoing my father's words from all those years ago. "You can get rid of it. You're good at that." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. He was utterly baffled. He had expected tears, arguments, negotiations. He had expected me to eventually fold, to accept my role as the designated emotional party who just needed to be managed. He had no protocol for this. No protocol for quiet, absolute refusal. "You're being insane," he finally sputtered. "You're choosing to be homeless out of spite." "No, Leo," I said, opening the door for him. "I'm choosing me. You're the one who has to live with the choices you made. Now, you should probably go. You have a house to sell." He stood there for a moment, his face a mask of fury and confusion, then stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I leaned against it, my legs weak, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't rage or despair. It felt like power. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of terrifying freedom and logistical nightmares. I had my work, a laptop, and a few changes of clothes I'd bought at a thrift store. Everything else, my books, my art supplies, my mother's old reading chair, every physical object that had tethered me to my past, was gone. Leo, true to form, had hired a junk removal service to clear out the house. He sent me a one-line email. "The house is empty. Hope you're happy." I didn't reply. Instead, I poured every ounce of my energy into my work. My tiny apartment became my new studio. I worked on the floor, on the kitchen counter, anywhere I could find a flat surface. The anger and hurt became fuel. I channeled it all into the final chapters of my client project, producing the best work of my career. I delivered it a week ahead of schedule. My editor was floored. Meanwhile, the ripples of Leo's grand gesture were spreading. The house sold quickly, for a good price. He moved my father into Azure Vistas, the luxury care facility he'd been so proud of. The first week, I got a call from Dad. He sounded small and lost. "Maya Bean," he said. "This place? It's very nice. The food is... well, it's fine, but it's not your cooking." He paused. "The nurses are all very professional, but they're so busy. No one has time to just sit." I could hear the cavernous loneliness in his voice. He was used to the familiar clutter of home, to the rhythm of my presence, to having someone who knew whether he preferred his tea with 1 sugar or 2. He was now a client, a patient, a room number. Then the calls from Leo started. They were no longer angry, but frayed and exasperated. "Dad called me 3 times today," he said in one call. He said he was bored. He wanted to know when you were coming to visit. "You need to go see him, Maya. He's your father, too." "Is he?" I asked. "Because the way I remember it, you made a unilateral decision about his care. You bought the solution, Leo. You managed the customer service complaints." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "That's not fair," he finally said. "Fair?" I laughed, a raw, humorless sound. "You want to talk about fair, Leo? Fair would have been a conversation. Fair would have been a thank you. Fair would have been not treating my entire life as a temporary inconvenience you could clear out with a junk removal service. You don't get to call me now and complain that your perfect, easy solution requires actual effort." I hung up. The calls kept coming, each one more desperate. The staff at Azure Vistas had started calling him. Dad wasn't integrating well. He was skipping the organized social activities. He was spending most of his time in his room. He kept asking the nurses for his daughter. Leo was being forced to confront the reality he had tried to buy his way out of. Care is not a transaction. It's a relationship. It's presence. It's time. It's the 1,000 little, invisible things I did every day that he had never even thought to notice. He had outsourced the logistics, but he couldn't outsource the love. The most surprising call came from his wife, Claire. Her voice, usually so crisp and controlled, was thin and strained. "Maya," she said, "Leo he's not handling this well. He's stressed all the time. This situation with your father is taking a toll. We thought maybe if you could just visit him once a week, it would calm him down." "The situation with my father," I repeated slowly. "You mean the situation that Leo created entirely on his own?" "Well, yes, but we have to be practical now." "I am being practical, Claire," I said. "I'm rebuilding my life from scratch. The one you two decided was disposable. I don't have time to clean up Leo's messes anymore." I ended the call before she could respond. The foundation of their perfect, curated life was cracking, and it was because a single, overlooked cog in their family machine had refused to keep turning. I didn't visit my father. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every part of me, conditioned by years of being the good daughter, screamed to go to him, to soothe his fears, to make it all okay. But I knew if I did, nothing would change. I would be slotted right back into my old role, the emotional caretaker, the one who smooths everything over. Leo would be let off the hook, his grand gesture validated, and my own sacrifice would be for nothing. For things to ever be different, the consequences had to land where they belonged, squarely on my brother's shoulders. My absence was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival. It's been a year now. I live in this small apartment, which I've slowly turned into a home. It's filled with my art, second-hand furniture I've lovingly restored, and plants that are thriving in the big, sunny window. It's not the house I grew up in, but it's mine, every square inch of it. The project I finished in that desperate flurry after leaving home landed me a 2-book deal with a major publisher. I'm finally drawing The Silent Cartographer, not as a secret passion project in a stolen sunroom, but as my job. My life's work is no longer a footnote. It's the main story. I spent years believing that my value was conditional. It was something to be earned, to be proven, to be validated by my family's approval. I thought that if I was dutiful enough, quiet enough, and self-sacrificing enough, they would eventually turn to me and say, "We see you. What you do matters." That day never came. The great, painful, and liberating lesson of this past year is that my value was never up for their negotiation. It was never in their hands to bestow. It was mine, all along. I just had to be brave enough to claim it. I had confused duty with love. I thought that by endlessly giving, I was being a good daughter and sister. But my sacrifice wasn't making them better people. It was enabling them. It allowed my father to remain passive, and my brother to remain a child, flinging money at problems he didn't want to emotionally engage with. My constant presence absolved them of their own responsibilities. By refusing to be the family utility, I forced them to finally confront the cost of their own choices. True love isn't about erasing yourself for someone else's comfort. It's about demanding the respect to exist fully, even if it makes other people uncomfortable. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to teach them how to live without you. I did eventually see my father. About 6 months ago, I arranged to meet him at a small park near his facility. I didn't tell Leo. My father looked older, but his eyes were clearer than they had been in years. We sat on a bench and talked. He told me that Leo now visited him 3 times a week, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. He had to deal with the pharmacist, talk to the doctors, and just sit with him in the silence. He was finally parenting his parent. "He complains a lot," my dad said with a small wry smile. "Says it's a lot of work." "It is," I said softly. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was surprisingly firm. "I'm sorry, Maya Bean," he said. "I never saw it. I just let you do it all. It was easier." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was an honest one. It was a start. We don't have the same relationship we once did. It's something new, something more honest, and something being rebuilt on a foundation of truth instead of assumption. My life is smaller now, in some ways. I have less space, less furniture, and a much smaller family tree. But it's also infinitely larger. It's filled with self-respect, purpose, and a quiet, unshakable peace. They saw me as a permanent fixture, an endlessly renewable resource, designed for their convenience. But a person is not a utility. A life is not a line item on a budget. And a heart is not a house you can sell out from under someone. So I want to ask you all, and please be honest in the comments below. Have you ever been the utility in your family? The one whose sacrifices are just expected? What happens when that utility finally decides to shut itself off? I read every comment, and your stories matter. They remind me that none of us are alone in this. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between your family's expectations and your own survival, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because we all deserve to be the main character in our own story.